This is number 13 of graphing derivatives. For this problem, this is the parent function or the original function, and we are required to find f prime and f double prime. So looking at the graph, we can see that there are two vertical asymptotes on x equals -2 and x equals 2. There's also a vertical or a horizontal asymptote on y equals 1. So let's make a test interval. To graph f prime, we must get the critical points of f. So critical points occur whenever the graph is discontinuous or non-differentiable, or when the derivative equals to 0. So as you can see here, it is not differentiable on x equals -2 and 2. Therefore, critical points will lie there and there. And looking at this part, you can see that the slope is equal to 0. So there will be a critical point on x equals 0. So making a test interval for f prime, we plug in the points for -2, 0, and 2. So on the to the left of -2, you can see that the function is positive. So we will put positive there, and from 2 to 0, it is negative, as you can see, since it is below the x-axis. And from 0 to 2, it is negative also. And lastly, from 2 to infinity, it will be positive. Therefore, on f prime, it will increase from -infinity to -2. It will decrease from -2 to 2. And it will increase from 2 to infinity. So looking at this part of the graph, we can see that from -infinity, the graph is almost 0. And as it approaches -2, the graph gets steeper and steeper, but never really touches -2. So therefore, the graph will be close to 0 and slowly increase to infinity, but doesn't touch -2. So it would look like this. And it is discontinuous on x equals -2, since it is not differentiable at that point. And for this part of the graph, you can see from -2 to 0, it is increasing. However, it is negative. So that means on f prime, it will be positive and it will decrease. And looking at the slope, we can see that it starts really steep and approaches to 0. So it will touch 0 on the graph of f prime. And it starts really steep and touches 0. So from 0 to 2, we can see that it is negative in the negative area. So from 0 to 2, we can see that it is negative and it is decreasing. So therefore, on f prime, decreases while it is negative. So therefore, it will decrease and go to -infinity. As you can see, the slope, it starts really shallow and gets deeper as you go across the x-axis. Therefore, it will be touching 0 and going down all the way to -infinity. And it will not touch 2, since there is an asymptote. And lastly, for this part of the function, it is decreasing while positive. So therefore, it will be negative on f prime while increasing to infinity. So as you can see, the slope, it starts off really steep, and as it approaches infinity, it gets shallower and shallower, almost approaching zero. Therefore, it will be negative going to infinity, like that. And to graph f double prime, we have to get the slope of f prime. So therefore, we have to analyze the graph of f prime. So from negative infinity to negative 2, we can see that it is increasing. As you can see from this graph, from 0 to negative 2, it is in the positive. And from 2 to 0, it is also positive. And from 0 to 2, it is negative. And from 2 to infinity, it is also negative. It will also decrease. So looking at the graph of f prime, we can see that from this point, x is really close to 0. So it increases and increases until it goes close to negative 2. Therefore, there will be a line going positive, increasing up to negative 2. And from 2 to 0, you can see that it increases, but on this graph, on f prime, from negative 2 to 0, it decreases. So that means it will start really small and approach 0. And for this part, we can see that it decreases and concaves down. Therefore, it will be negative and also concave down. And it doesn't reach x equals negative 2. Lastly, this part of the graph, you can see it increases and concaves down while being negative. So we can see that it starts really steep and then later becomes shallower and shallower. So it will be from a really big number to almost 0. And it increases, so it will be positive. And those are the graphs of f, f prime, and f double prime.